Today, let's sew a pair of wide-legged pants. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today I am going to be trying to make a pair of wide-legged trousers. This pattern is Butterick 6715, and I will say that this pattern was a lot. And as we get into the pattern, I will show you all the reasons for why I'm saying that, but it was marked easy, and I will say that it really wasn't that easy to do. But the first step for any pattern was I started cutting out all my materials, and this was actually pretty straightforward. I had enough fabric to do it. You can see that I'm just using this navy blue fabric that I got from a thrifty Notion, so there was no pattern matching that needed to happen for the fabrics itself. Once I had it all cut out, then it was time to start serging everything, making sure the edges were nice and clean. The material that I was using was incredibly messy, so for my step for this was very important that I made sure that I finished off the edges so that they weren't fraying everywhere. But depending on if you do not have a serger, you could definitely do a zigzag stitch using your home sewing machine, or you could use pinking shears just to make sure that you're getting some of those edges to be a little bit more finished and you won't have the messy problems as you go through making your pants. Once I had my pattern pieces all prepped, it was then time to begin sewing them. First though, I had to deal with the mess that was my serger. After doing all this, you can also see that the floor is a mess from the fabrics. This was just very, very messy fabric. The first step for the pattern was to add the pockets. This was actually incredibly simple to do. I didn't know how hard adding a pocket was going to be, if there was going to be a lot to it, as I've never done a pocket like this before. And I'll say that the pattern lays it out very, very well on how to build out the pocket and then the lining for the pocket into your pants. It's all very straightforward steps of just sewing everything, you know, like with the pocket, with the right side of the pocket, like with the wrong side of your pants, and then you repeat this for both sides. I will say to be sure that you are doing like a mirroring effect. So remember, you have like the right side and left side of your pants, so especially if you're doing a fabric that has like the same look for both the right and wrong side, be sure that you are mirroring those so that you don't get two pockets on the same two sides of your pants and you have to go back and redo it. So that would be my one tip for that. Otherwise, you just kind of move forward, pinning it all together. When it came time to sewing the pockets onto the pants, this was very simple as it was just a straight stitch. There was a slight curve, but again, when you kind of go through to clean it up, we will be clipping that curve, so it's much easier to press this over and fold it. I will say one thing I learned about this pattern very, very quickly was it was so important to be cutting your threads as you went along. You can see the cat was helping here as well, but there's just so many threads that start to appear because of adding all the little pieces together that if you try to wait until the end, it almost gets overwhelming that there's so many things to cut through. So if you're someone who normally goes through and cuts everything at the end to trim it off, I would definitely recommend take the time as you're doing each step to trim off each of those threads so that you're not stuck with like 50 different threads to cut at the end. Next, it was then time to top stitch the pocket as well as do some understitching so that it laid all nice and flat. You can see here, this is what the pocket looks like, and then you will fold this over. And then what I'm going to be doing is pressing the pocket down. Now this was fabric that would burn, so I ended up using a protector as I go along. But once I got it all nice and pressed, I then did that top stitching so the pocket would lay nice and flat and smooth. Once I got that pocket done, it was then time to add the lining for the pocket. So this is so that it can line up perfectly with the pants and it kind of fits your hip a little better, and then you have an actual pocket that will appear. This was also very straightforward as the pattern pieces lined up perfectly for the step, and then you had to add, you know, like a little dot for where the piece would go. So it was very easy to line up. I didn't really have any issues with this. Just be sure that when you are laying it on, you are laying it the correct way. But as you can see at the bottom, both the pocket as well as that facing have that little curve, so they fit really, really nicely together. And once you do this for one side of your pant, you will then go back and repeat this for the second side. And then we'll just be sewing up right along this curve all the way around so that we get the pocket and the pocket lining attached to each other. So now I have it for both sets of my pant legs, and I'm just going to be sewing this on. So yes, this is a curve, so just take your time going around it, but this was not actually too bad to do. And then what it has you do is at the end there is a little straight portion, so we are just going to be sewing that to our pant leg, and we're just going to be basting it. So technically there are 3 layers here, so 2 the pocket and then that pant leg, so we're just basting this in place so that it holds it, and this is going to allow it to be much easier to work with when we actually start doing the construction of the pants, so that you're not going to have multiple layers all moving around. Everything is nice and staying where it's supposed to. So this is what the one pant leg looks like. So now I'm just going to repeat this for the second side, and then it was time to start working on the zipper. And the zipper is where things got really challenging for me, as I felt that the instructions in this pattern were not done well. They had like some nice diagrams I thought would be helpful. And the first step was essentially basting all of this in place. So we're going to be sewing that portion between the large square and the bottom, and then basting the top portion of the zipper fly. And this was to help you get the zipper in. I found it incredibly challenging though, as their instructions weren't really clear on how they wanted you to do the zipper fly. So what I will say is a bunch of what I did for this pattern for the zipper was not the way I don't think the instructions wanted you to do it. I just couldn't figure it out. But I took my zipper, and then what I figured out that I needed to do was you want one side of this zipper fly to essentially be folded, and then you're going to be putting the right side of the zipper with the right side of the fabric, and then the other side you're going to be then folding it over so that like your zipper will be opening from the front. I know that really doesn't make a lot of sense, but so you can see here that I have my zipper foot. I'm adding the zipper so that it is on that folded portion of the zipper fly edge, and then on the second side what I'm going to be doing is just sewing the zipper to that portion of the zipper fly, and then the area like where the zipper is going to be opening will be at the front of the pants, and you shouldn't be able to see it. I don't know if this was exactly how the pattern wanted you to do it. If you would like a more in-depth version of how I did this, I can definitely do another video, but this is what my zipper ended up looking like. It at least was facing the correct direction. Now it was time to start adding the darts, which again, these were very simple, nothing compared to the hardness of the zipper. I just went through, added the darts to both the back of the pants. Then it was just time to sew the darts in place. I use pins to help me guide to see where I should be sewing the darts, and I found this as incredibly helpful, but you could also use tailor's chalk. So now with both the darts done in the back, it was time to actually begin constructing the pants, or what I feel like would be constructing the pants, and that was to sew up the inseam on both sides. So with the right sides together for the pants, I just pinned all of this up and did it for both sides of the pants, since you have both the back and the front. And then I just took that seam all the way up for both sides of the legs to sew the back of the pant onto the front of the pant at the inseam. This felt really exciting, as it felt like the pants were actually starting to come together. Then I just continued on with basically constructing my pants by sewing up the crotch line, as you can see. So there were little areas where you added notches to help you with this lining up, and then I just took that seam all the way from where the zipper ends to the back of the pants to make this be essentially our pants. And at this time, when you finish that seam, it will then be sort of just doing all the final little finishing touches, including the waistband, finishing up the zipper, and doing the hem. So doing this portion of the seam was very exciting. As you can see, this is what my pants currently look like. So while we still have to sew on the sides of the pants, you can see that they're fitting pretty well. I did notice at this point that they were a little bigger than I was expecting, so I did go ahead and do a little tailoring on the sides to just make sure that I really brought it in, as I wanted to be sure that like they're wide-legged pants, but I didn't want them to be super large. So at this point, since I knew exactly where I wanted to be sewing the pants to, I just pinned up the sides of the pants, and then I did want it to flare out a little bit at the end, so you can see at the top I've actually pinned it so that I'm starting much further in than like that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I just did like a diagonal so that it would eventually go to the 5/8 seam allowance on the side. And I did this for either side of the pants so that they have a more fitted look and looks better on me. So this is what it ended up looking like, and I'm really happy with the result. So next up is all about the waistband, and the first part was to make the little belt loops. So the pattern calls for 3 of these, so you have technically 6 pieces, but we're just going to be matching these with the right sides together for both the front and the back, and then pinning them up, and we're going to be sewing 3 of the sides. So there's 2 long sides, and then I guess it's technically not 3, it would be like 5 sides since of the way that it's done, but we're just not sewing across the top. And then we're going to be repeating this for all of the other ones, and then just taking that seam all the way around. The seam was really easy, and once I had it done, I then started to go through and trim off any of the extra fabric, as well as any of the extra strings, and then turn them right side out. Once they were turned, I then pressed them. You can see now I am using my fabric protector so I do not burn the fabric. I found this as a really great way to do it, and as you'll see later on, I ended up using the steam for a lot of this, and with this fabric, since it was thicker, it was very helpful. I also started to add the interfacing to my pieces, as these are going to be the facing for the waistband, and I decided to get it done while I had my iron out. After I was finished pressing, I then did the edge stitching for those little belt loop, the parts for them themselves. So you just very carefully sewed around the edges. So this is why it helps to press it out so much, as it was already flat for me, and I could just go through and make sure that it lined up nicely. Now it was just time to add those belt loops to our pants. So as you can see here, you press it down and then you're just going to be attaching it to where there are little notches. So when we cut out the pattern pieces, there was notches for where you wanted to add these little belt loops at. And then you just go through and you actually are only basting it, as we're going to be really sewing it on at one of the steps for the waistband. Now that that was done, it was time to assemble our waistband facing, and that was using all of these different pattern pieces, so 7, 8, and 9, and having them connected into one large facing for the waistband. So this part was very simple. You're just taking 3 straight seams and attaching all 3 of those pieces together. And then for the edge finishing for my waistband, I just went through and serged the entire thing so I have a nice and neat look. I then went through and pressed out my entire waistband to make sure that it was laying nice and flat, and all the seams were flat as well. Depending on the portion that I was using my fabric protector, and then I attached my waistband to my pants. Now, attaching the waistband at the top was not difficult. You just have to go through and very carefully attach it. I found the quilting clips worked really well since my fabric was so thick. But then we had to also attach it on one side, and really pay attention when you're doing your pattern, if you use this pattern as well, for which side you are attaching it to, as it does depend on the zipper. One side the zipper it will work, one side the zipper it will not work. So just really pay attention to that when it comes to that step if you are also making these. The first step was you did a basting stitch, and then you went back through and did the final stitch, and then I just cleaned up all of this, so trimmed the fabric, got rid of any raw edges, and made sure that it looked nice and neat before I went through and folded this over so that then I could do the understitching. So understitching is when you're taking, that seam allowance and sewing the lining to it. That way it will lay nice and flat. And as you can see here at the edge, my zipper does appear out as what we would want. We don't want the zipper hidden. And that's just what I mean by making sure that you're doing the correct edge of the zipper of attaching the lining to it. So now I just went through and did my understitching to make sure that everything laid nice and flat. Then I went through, pressed everything out. As you can see, the belt loops are actually facing up, and that is how you want them to be. You want to make sure that they're not getting caught. Then it was just time to baste the bottom edge of the facing in place so that it would help you know where to do the stitch on the right side of the fabric, and this will help everything lay much smoother. I also went ahead and did the decorative zipper stitching at this point. I found this a little bit difficult. I saw that some people online will make like a template, that way they know how to do the stitching for this, but I think it really depends on what you're most comfortable with. And here what my pants currently look like. So you can see the zipper portion is basically complete. We also have the waistband has been basted, so it's started to be going down. And now it is just time to actually do the full stitching. So going very, very slowly all the way around, making sure that it's all laying up nice and neat. I did take the basting out as I found that it got really messy and it wasn't laying well. And I found it much easier if I just took my time and did the stitching all the way around. In addition, I did sew on the belt loops at this point for the bottom portion, so that everything was just laying nice and it looked very neat. I then went through and just did some top stitching all the way around the pants. Now things were really starting to wrap up, as it was just time to add a hook and eye to the top portion of the zipper to make sure that the pants stayed closed, and all this was doing was hand stitching the hook and eye on. And of course I did do a small little test to make sure the hook and eye worked, and the zipper was still able to be zipped up, and it was good to go. Now before I did the final hem, I was really unhappy with how the zipper was laying. I still don't know if it's a fact of that something was done wrong with the zipper, if not enough fabric was used, but it does just kind of bulk in a couple places. So I took some heat and some steam and really pressed the zipper out, and I feel like this really did help my zipper. Now it was time to do the hem, so I figured out how much I really wanted to have the pants be hemmed off, and the first step was to finish the edge stitching for that portion. Now this pant has a rolled hem, so I did have to adjust this a few times to make sure I wasn't making it be too short. And the reason that I'm not doing the exact markings that were on the pants themselves is because I am much shorter than what the pants were originally designed for. So I did have to do a little bit of an alteration to make sure that it was going to fit me. So here's what the pants look like. I think that this is actually a really good length, and I'm happy when they're rolled, so I think it's going to be good to go. Now it was just time to do that basting stitch around for the initial length to make sure that it was right, and then you go through and you do the rolled hem portion of it again, and then we just do another basting stitch and then actually sew it. So here what the pants look like on me, I would say that the top portion of the zipper is where I have the most issue. I don't know if it's a matter that I made it a little too big. Overall, they fit really well on the back and on the sides. I really like how they fit. I did notice if I rolled the waistband, they fit so much better. So I think that this may have just been a sizing issue of I should have shortened the zipper area, and that may have helped overall with, like me being more petite. I also found that if I added like a belt, they fit really nicely and they look really cute, and I'm really happy with the way that they turned out. So I think overall this pattern, I finished it, but I would not recommend. It just was really hard to get the whole zipper portion correct. Now I did have a little extra fabric, so I made a matching bag, which I think looks really cute and is a hint to some new Etsy patterns coming out. Let me know if there's any other patterns you want me to try out, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.